If you've reached this point in the series, that means that you're ready to purchase some parts. There are several vendors that you can order parts from, but the majority of your parts are going to come from VexPro or West Coast products. Some things like rivets, bolts, and tools are going to come from other vendors. When you order parts, you want to make sure that you order the ones that you put in CAD. So you're going to take note of the part numbers and vendors as you're downloading all these parts and keep a reference spreadsheet like this one as you do that. This will also help you keep track of your quantities that you're going to need when you go to order. A good way to keep track of this is to actually create a spreadsheet and put it inside of your assembly folder. We're going to try to make this video pretty brief because we want you to use this as a reference. The quantity shown in the spreadsheet will show the absolute minimum, but in case you want to order replacement parts, you're going to want to up your quantities from here. Some of the replacement parts I usually get are hex axles and bearings, for instance. Let's go top to bottom and look at the majority of what you're going to need. The first items are going to be master links and chains. So we use number 25 master links and chains for our drivetrain, although for tougher games like the 2016 game, you may want to opt to swap to number 35 chain. Just be aware that if you do swap to number 35 chain, your spacing and your sprockets need to change accordingly. There are number 25 and number 35 sprockets available to you. If you're going to use number 35, I believe you can still use the 18-tooth sprocket that they sell. The 18-tooth sprocket that we usually use is number 25 and it's half-inch hex bore. Make sure you order the right sprocket. Make sure you order all the same tooth count sprockets. We use half-inch hex bore with Thunder Hex and it does fit together and it works really well. You're going to want to make sure that for quantity, you're going to order at least 10 feet for each side on a 6-wheel drive. I usually order extra, so I have 40 feet of roller chain. For the sprocket quantity, I have one sprocket for each outside wheel of the West Coast drive, but the gearbox has 2 sprockets on the inside. So for a 6-wheel drive, you're going to have 8 sprockets. For an 8-wheel drive, you're going to have 2 on the middle, so you're going to increase that to 12 because you'll be adding 4 additional sprockets. Again, if you're doing this in CAD, you'll have the quantity correct. For the metal, I believe that 4 sticks of this 59-inch 1x2 tubing will be enough for most robot geometries. If you plan on doing a couple of cross bracing members and things like that, you may want to up this quantity based on your bill of materials. Next, the VersaBlock kit. You're going to need 1 VersaBlock kit for every wheel that is not on the transmission. So for a 6-wheel drive, we have quantity 4 for the VersaBlock kits. If you're going to use the sliding bearing block for your transmission, you're going to want to order 2 additional quantities for the VersaBlock kit. That is the difference between this and the flanged bearing mount, which we talked about in the CAD video. For your wheel axles, we use half-inch Thunder Hex, although you can use regular half-inch hex rod. However, if you do use regular half-inch hex rod, you're going to want to make sure that your bearings match. The quantity for the hex rod, 3 feet, we usually get 2 sticks of this, and that usually covers our needs for the season. For the bearings, you're going to want to make sure that if you're using Thunder Hex that this does match. Half-inch Thunder Hex is the 13.75 millimeter, and you're going to want to make sure that you get the flanged bearing. Quantity for this is pretty simple. You're going to need 1 bearing for the outside bearing block on the transmission, and then you will need 2 bearings per VersaBlock kit. So I have 4 VersaBlock kits. That means I need 8 plus 2 for the transmission so that I get 10. I recommend ordering a couple of these VersaFrame 90-degree gussets. They're just sheet metal with the pre-drilled hole pattern inside of it. If you're not doing any belly pan, I believe that 8 is the minimum that you're going to need to get this done, because you need 1 gusset on the top and 1 gusset on the bottom to sandwich the tubing pieces together to make the frame stiff. The next item is going to be the West Coast Products cam. You're going to need 1 cam per VersaBlock kit for the outside wheels. You don't need a VersaBlock cam for the transmission, but you do need one for every single wheel that is on a sliding bearing block. So those quantities should match to be safe. Next, we have acetyl spacers. We usually get a series of these at 1/16, 1/8, quarter, and half-inch lengths. So about 6 packages of that should be able to complete your drivetrain. The spacing is 100% dependent on the size of your wheels, how fat they are, how long you're going to cut your axles, how far away your shaft collars or spacers are going to go on there. So you need to modify your quantity here based on your specific drivetrain. The next item is the clamping shaft collars. We actually don't use the clamping shaft collars. If you have Thunderhex, you can run a 1/4 inch tap inside and then use a 1/4 inch bolt with a fender washer to keep the wheels on and to keep the spacers on the transmissions. But if you want to use shaft collars, we have included 10. You'll need 2 for each outside wheel and 1 to keep the wheel on the output shaft of the transmission. So that brings that to a quantity of 10. That should always match the quantity for the bearings, so that's a pretty easy one to check. Next, the belly pan. The belly pan is going to be dependent on where you get your material from. I recommend looking around locally because you are going to pay a pretty good premium to ship a large piece of metal around. So if you can find a piece of metal locally, that would be the best option. If you can't find something locally, you can get McMaster card. They usually ship within a reasonable time for a robotics build season. If you're doing the CNC method, you're going to be looking for your own specific type of metal with a certain thickness so that you can cut that out on the CNC. If you don't want to use the CNC method, you can get the metal and you can get a large hole saw bit and you can cut several pieces out of that to lighten it. Or you can also get the expanded metal method that we talked about in the last video. You can get that from McMaster Car. You can also typically get that from Lowe's or Home Depot or some of your other Ace Hardware stores, things like that nearby. The next thing I'm going to talk about are the transmissions. The transmissions we will want to select from either VexPro or West Coast products unless you're making your own. So to order these gearboxes, I will walk through how to do that really quick. I go to VexPro, I click on Motion, then I go down until I find the type of gearbox that I want. In this example, I'm going to use the West Coast Products dual speed gearbox. Now there is a difference between the regular West Coast Products dual speed gearbox and the actual West Coast style dual speed gearbox. Both of these gearboxes are made by West Coast Products, but there is a West Coast and a non-West Coast style for this drive system. The normal looks like this. The West Coast has larger spacers so that the chain can pass right here next to the gear on the inside and then the tube is out here. This is very important so that you know the difference between these. This video is only on the West Coast style, so the West Coast style in this case is only these two options. I would ignore the other two completely. I'm going to use the 3-sim in this case. Now we only want one kit here. Based on the JVN number, I had a 12 to 42, 14 to 60, and a 24 to 50, which left me with a 2.06 spread on our high gear. So with that 2.06 spread, it automatically picks the 50 and the 24 for us. If you are using the dual speed power takeoff, then you most likely already know what you're doing and you don't need to even watch this video. But you're not going to use this unless you're using a third speed on this particular gearbox, so I'm going to ignore that for now. The pinion count is going to be based on the number of motors you have and the size of the pinion. In this case, I'm going to use the 12 tooth and I'm going to have 3, one for each mini sim that's going to be in this gearbox. Next, I'm going to go down to my sprocket. My sprocket is going to be 18 tooth and every transmission has 2 sprockets on the inside. So we'll have 2 for that. Next, I'm going to add my mini sims to the design. So that's 3. Make sure that your pinions match that. You can also opt to order your speed controllers here as well if you want to do that. And then lastly, if it's a shifting transmission, you're going to add 1 piston per transmission. And this is important, you need the fittings. I also recommend that you order a couple of extra fittings because they are very small and very fragile. You don't need Teflon tape for them, but it is very important that you get enough fittings for this case. Now, at the end, I have configured 1 full transmission. And now I'll change my quantity to 2 to add that to my cart. That way I have all of the parts that I just have. That configuration and everything is now in my cart. So if I go to my cart, I now have $515.86 per, and then it's about 1,000 for both of these. So that's the full setup, and I have 2 quantities of this setup. So before you go and purchase, before you go and do anything, make sure that you, number 1, have the West Coast style. Do not order the wrong one. That would be unfortunate. Make sure that you have the correct gear ratio based on your JVN calculation sheet. Make sure that you have the correct pinion, and make sure you have the correct numbers for your motors. Make sure you have 2 sprockets per side for the transmissions. Again, if that's 2 for this one, doubling that, you'll have 4 total coming in the mail, and then 1 shifter for each. The last thing I would like to do is go back and take a look for the bearings. So the bearing blocks specifically are particularly different depending on which method you chose to use. You can use the sliding bearing block, or you can use this bearing block. Most folks use this bearing block, or they make their own. So I would take this one, the 3634, and add 2 of those to the cart as well. So we have 3634. We will add 2 of those to the cart. Then you'll go through your spreadsheet and add the rest of this to your shopping cart. Add your wheels wherever you're getting those from. Wheels vary. You can get them from Robot Marketplace, you can get them from Vex, you can get them from West Coast Products. West Coast Products in particular, I love their alloy wheels. So we usually get our wheels from West Coast Products, even though we're in North Carolina and it takes an extra day for us to get the wheels. It is worth it for us. So after you get all of those components, you get your robot stuff out of the way, there are a couple of tools that I think you guys should take a look at and purchase to make this build easier. Number 1, you are going to need rivets. I recommend you buy them in bulk from Grainger. We usually buy blind rivets that have a grip from 1/8 to 3/8 of an inch or so, and they need to be 5/32 in diameter. That's typically not a size you can get from Lowe's or Home Depot, so Grainger has them. The next thing I would recommend you buy is the titanium coated high-speed step bit set, the cone bit from Harbor Freight. That's a $20 buy. You get 2 bits, and that will allow you to make the holes if you are not using the CNC on your tube. Next, I highly recommend you also buy a 1/4 inch air hydraulic gun riveter from Harbor Freight. This is a $70 tool that will allow you to blow through all those rivets on the belly pan in the blink of an eye. And if you do not have a chain breaker, you can get a motorcycle chain breaker from any shop, but to break number 25 chain, you're going to want to buy a specific chain breaker tool for this, and Vex Pro has one. There is also the Dark Soul chain breaker as well, which I have in the shop. Both of these are excellent. I highly recommend that you buy one of these. If you try to use the regular chain breaker tool from McMaster-Carr, it's going to be very frustrating trying to break this really tiny chain with that. So those are the 4 things that I could not do without. The rivets in bulk, you save a lot of money that way. The cone bit for the times where you're not CNC cutting the tubing. The air riveter is a godsend in the shop to get all of these rivets put in, especially if you're doing the belly pan, where every 1 inch you have a rivet. And then the chain breaker, huge time saver. So in closing, I hope this video shed some light on which products to get, where to get them, and what quantities to pick to match to your design. If you have any additional tools or things to add, leave us a comment at the bottom of this video, and if this is helpful, please take a look at all of the other videos as well to get the full scoop on how to design your West Coast Products drivetrain from scratch.